Now that Amanda's here, we can start. And first of all, thank you very much for coming. This is the first presentation of a pretty packed schedule for this semester. And the schedule has been posted all around. The timing is also on there. There's 1 week where we're a little off timing, so just be aware when you're looking at the schedule. For those of you taking the 1-unit class, make sure you get me your questions and your research questions by email. I've gotten some of yours, but I don't think I've gotten all of them. And I'll also say now, before I forget, for you folks taking the class for a unit, the next week's assignment will be posted on Blackboard Learn under our class by tonight. So thank you very much for doing that. Now, but we are very lucky to have Lori Racca here. Lori Racca cares. She wants. It's not just talking about research or science. She cares. She wants all of you to be informed about employment opportunities, especially with the state, and for those of you interested in getting your PG at some point, your professional geology certificate at some point. She works for the Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists, as you can see, but instead of me trying to remember what you just said, I'll just let you talk about your background. So thank you very much for being here.
Great. Well, I'm happy to see such a great turnout. I never know when I throw a party how many people are going to show up. You never know. This is kind of a dry topic, and it's probably not something that most of you ever thought about before. My name is Lori, and let's switch to the agenda. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to have introductions, and no, I'm not going to make each one of you introduce yourselves and tell me something about you.
Quite get that.
Or tell you. I hate that part of any particular company meeting where you have to stand up, and so I'm not going to do that to you. But I would like to get an idea of how many of you are actual geology majors and environmental science majors, any other type of major? No?
Just sciences.
Just general science? Okay. How many seniors or juniors? How many graduate students? How many freshmen and sophomore? Okay. Just so I can kind of get an idea of where you're at. Again, my name is Lori Racca. I have over 25 years experience as a geologist, a working geologist. About half of that time was spent in private consulting and half of that time with the state. My general area of practice has been environmental geology, mostly hazardous waste cleanups. I've done some engineering geology, just enough to be dangerous. But my focus has generally been groundwater cleanups, soil cleanups, that kind of thing. So I have a little bit of experience on both ends. Plus, I also have a tendency to be the person that leads the teams. I'm the project manager, I'm the fixer, and I'm also the one that does the hiring. So that's why I thought you guys might be interested in how to start your careers. But because I'm paid by the Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists, I have to go through and talk to you about them first and explain to you why licensing is going to be an important part of your career if you practice geology in the state of California. So actually, before we get too far along, does anybody know what this is behind me? In the picture? It's a very important part of California geology. What do you think of when you think of California geology?
Serpentine. Gold.
Tectonics.
San Andreas.
All right. So, knowing that that's the San Andreas, what do you think that is? That's a sag pond east of Bakersfield. So the purpose of the Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists is protection of the public. A lot of the licensees out there think that the purpose of the board is to promote their industry. That's totally wrong. We work for the government. We are here to protect the public. We are here to protect the public from engineers who drop decimal points and their buildings fall down. We're here to protect the public from geologists who can't recognize a landslide playing beneath a house and the house slides down the hill under and into another house. We license individuals, we enforce laws and regulations, and then we also promote general professional conduct. The board's made up of appointees, government appointees. Governor Brown appoints people, they sit on the board. About half of them are public members, half of them are professionals, which means you get an interesting mix. A lot of people don't really understand what we do. And again, the highest priority of the board is protection of the public. This section of code right here, 7810, is highlighted because that's the section in the laws for the geologists and geophysicists. The other ones are applied to the engineers and land surveyors. So what is licensure? Being licensed permits you to practice geology for others. So, for example, if you want to work in the oil industry and you go to work for Chevron, you are not practicing geology for others, you're practicing geology within a company that doesn't provide a product to the public. If you are practicing geology for others, you are working for a firm that Susie Q may go out and hire to put in a well, to deepen her well, to find out why her well went dry. Or you might be doing environmental geology where you're trying to figure out where the gasoline went from the tank that leaked at the Arco down the street. Or you could be working for the state government. State, county governments, local agencies, that's all practicing geology for the public. So why do you want to get licensed? Basically, you're going to make more money. A licensed person is the one who's in charge of the project. They are personally liable for that project. Usually the toast to a newly licensed geologist is, congratulations, you can be sued now. And you are personally liable. One thing to understand when you go out and get a job is that it's not the company that's licensed. It's not the agency that's licensed. It is you that are licensed. I don't license Kleinfelder. I don't license Tetra Tech. I don't license the State Water Resources Control Board. I license Joe Smith. I license Lori Racca. I license Adrian Thiebel, whoever. And a lot of people fail to understand that. In the last round of applications that I reviewed, I had a corporate officer try and get me to allow one of his employees to take the test. And I couldn't do it because he wasn't in responsible charge of that person's work. The geologist that this guy had worked under had left the firm, and the officer wanted to sign off that person. He had no knowledge of that person's work. So tip number one, when you get a job, keep in touch with the people you work under, because if you work for me and then I go work for Tetra Tech, but you're still over here at Kleinfelder, you still need to be in touch with me so that when it comes time for you to get your application in, you can call me up and go, hey Lori, can you sign me off for the work that I did under you during this time period? And I will say yes, and I will fill out the form and sign it and stamp it and send it off to the board, or give it to you to send off to the board. So you can't assume that, when somebody leaves the company that you never talk to them again. Stay in touch with the people that you work with, because it'll become very important to you. And the other reason to become licensed is credibility. Basically, because the buck stops with you when you're licensed and you're taking responsibility for that product, you have a little bit more stature or credibility in the workforce if you are licensed, because there's a lot of things that you can do that other people can't. If, for example, a non-licensed geologist who didn't used to have to be licensed, say they worked for the oil industry or they worked for the federal government, they can't go out and do consulting on the side. That's illegal. They're not licensed. They haven't passed the test. They don't have, all the requirements. They haven't met the requirements So also you'll get, if you're working in the government, if you're reviewing environmental reports, a lot of times you'll be in a group where you're talking to a responsible party, somebody who's created contamination. And some of the government staff aren't licensed. And you'll get some licensee on the other side of the table going, I don't have to listen to you because you're not licensed. And they'll use it against you. So keep that in mind, it's well worth the effort. So here's a bunch of boring things about laws. As you can tell, the books are quite big. This includes all 3 practice acts and all 3 sets of regulations that the board covers. It includes the Engineering Act, the Geology Act, and the Land Surveyors Act. The difference between a law and a regulation is a law is what the legislature writes and the governor signs. That's what you have to comply with. And then a regulation implements the law. It's the one that goes, well, this is what we really meant. Because a lot of times the legislature doesn't know what the details are. So the legislature passes the law, and then the implementing agencies will develop regulations, and it's all done under public review. One thing to keep in mind is that the laws and regs change constantly. Most of our licensees think that they can just remember the regs that were in effect when they took their exam. And the laws change continually. These sections are the ones that I think you, as geologists just starting out, should focus on. You should know what the legal definition of geology is. You need to know what the legal definition of geophysics is. You need to know what responsible charge of work. Responsible charge is the person who's licensed, the person who's stamping and certifying that that work was done properly. There's some exemptions. There's the federal exemption. I can't tell the U.S. government what to do. So their employees do not have to be licensed. Civil engineers can practice some geology without being licensed, because the way the law reads, civil engineers can do just about anything. There is a specific section against prohibiting a licensed geologist from practicing civil engineering. So you should also look at the definition of civil engineering. For example, there's, let's say you're designing a septic system to dispose of waste for a small subdivision. The geologist can characterize the soils. They can do percolation tests to determine whether or not those soils can accept the liquid part of the waste. They can do all of that stuff. The minute they start designing that tank or designing the conveyance that goes from the structure to the tank to the leach line, they're doing civil engineering. So in most of your work out in the real world, you're going to be working with civil engineers. You're going to be working with toxicologists. You're going to be working with biologists. And each piece of that puzzle is critical, but you need to know who's responsible for what and who's allowed to sign off on what, especially in environmental. Environmental's a very multidisciplinary field. And a lot of times people think that just because they've been working in the industry for so long, that they can do civil engineering, even though they're not a licensed civil engineer. Well, I've been working on this kind of project forever. I know what it is. Nope, don't do it. You'll get fined. And then here's the regulations. There's a specific reference to responsible position. That's something that even licensees tend to get messed up. A licensed geologist is in responsible charge. An experienced, unlicensed geologist who's working under that person can be in what's called a responsible position. You should read that definition and know what it is, because only work done in responsible position qualifies you to become licensed. So if you're working for an engineering company and you're running curves in the soils lab, that's not responsible position. That's technician work. If you're on the back of the drill rig logging the soils, and making decisions on where to put the next boring based on what you observe in the field, that's responsible position. So know those differences. It sounds really, really boring and crazy, but it will become important to you at some point in time. And one thing that's new is the fingerprint requirement. As of, I think it was July 1st, if you apply for a GIT, a professional geologist license, a certified hydrogeologist certification, or a certified engineering geologist certification, you now have to pass a background check and submit your fingerprints. And there are certain crimes that that will disqualify you. They haven't given me a list of what those are, but they tend to be things that would affect licensees. So fraud, embezzlement, stuff like that. If you got a DUI when you were 18, that's not going to disqualify you. It's stuff that would apply to the business end and misrepresentation, that kind of thing. So don't freak out if you've got something that you would have to disclose. And then professional standards and code of conduct. That's something that's very important. As a licensed geologist, I am only allowed to practice in my area of expertise. A few years ago when I was still in consulting, I was asked to map landslides along Highway 50. And as I told you earlier, I knew just enough engineering geology to be dangerous. So as a licensed person, I did not take responsible charge of that project. I worked under somebody else. I worked under another PG, CEG at my firm, and he signed and stamped the report. But I was under his direction. So if I had tried to sign and stamp that report, I would have been going outside my area of expertise, and if something had happened, I could have been brought up, I could have been cited and fined. So why bother with the GIT? The GIT is a newer thing, well, not newer. GIT wasn't available when I was in school. It's kind of similar to the EIT, the Engineering Training Certificate. In order to get licensed, there's 3 tests you have to pass. Well, you have to get your education. Right now, the law specifies that you have to have a degree in geological sciences from a college or university. It does not say 4-year college. It does not say 2-year college. It does not say anything other than that. And so that's been very troublesome, because I've actually had somebody with a community college degree apply to get licensed. He had 8 units of geology. I told him no. But you know, according to the law, he could have appealed and possibly gotten permission to take the exam. You need experience under a licensed geologist. You need 5 years combined education and experience. Your bachelor's degree will get you 2 years. If you have a master's degree, it will get you another year. So you either need 2 or 3 years under a licensed person, and it has to be documented. So stay in touch with the people you work for and make sure you're working in a responsible position. When you first start out, they'll be training you, but you'll get to a point where you'll need to document what kind of work you're doing. And I would suggest that you keep your own log, because when you get to helping your licensed person fill out the forms, it's nice to know, oh yeah, I worked on that landslide project, or yeah, I installed 30 wells. Well, I helped you design 30 wells. Installation of a well, sitting on the back of a drill rig basing drillers, is not geology. Logging the soil, logging the rock, coming up with a preliminary design, submitting it to your licensed geologist for approval or changes, and then building the well, that's geology. So there's a subtle difference, but you should know what that difference is, because if I get an application in that says I installed a well, well, that's nice. That doesn't tell me a whole lot. And then you need to pass the ASBOG exam, which consists of the fundamentals of geology and the professional geology portions, and the California specific exam. You do not have to get your GIT. You are eligible to take the fundamentals exam as soon as you get your degree. And I recommend you do so, but it's entirely optional. One of the disadvantages of it is that it's going to cost you $250 to apply, and I think the actual test fee is $150. But on the plus side, if you pass it, you've got a GIT certificate that you can put on your resume, put in your job application packets, and show potential employers that you are motivated and that you know what your career path is and that you're willing to take the steps necessary to advance. On the negative side, it costs you a lot of money. Another positive is if you are one of those people who are test phobic. I have a friend who's test phobic. One test is easier to pass than 3. And so you can break it up. That's one advantage.
Lori,
Yes.
in your position, what are you hearing back from employers now that the GIT's in there being used? Are they looking for that? Is that?
I find that it's not so much a requirement, but if you have two or three applicants that are basically the same, and one has a GIT and the other 2 don't, the GIT is going to get the job. It's just that discriminating. I was fortunate when I went to school. I had a professor named Dr. Roland Brady. He was a licensed geologist. He had started out in consulting. And at the time there was no GIT, but the big push was environmental work. He got a grant and offered a 40-hour HAZWOP health and safety training at Fresno State on spring break. So anybody who wanted to take it took it, and that's got me my first job. I had gone in to apply at a local consulting firm, and the owner basically told me he had already hired somebody else, but he invited me in for an interview strictly because I already had that certification. And he wound up hiring me for a position that he made a position for me because he felt that if I was motivated enough to get that extra certification, I was already one step ahead of some of the other folks there. This is our website. It probably doesn't show up very well. But there are a lot of links. The website's horrible, I will tell you that. I'm not in charge of it. I would fix it if I could. But if you go up to applicants and then drill down to where geology is, this is where you'll find information. If you ever have trouble finding information on the website, shoot me an email, give me a call. It's my job to tell you where it is and to help you get through it. And this is just a screenshot of the Association of State Boards of Geology website. This is kind of what's on the FG portion of the exam, which is what you would take to get your GIT. The ASBOG website has all kinds of information. It has a candidate handbook. It has surveys on what geologists do. It has a lot of good resources that you should look at. They also have statistics on the pass rate. For first-time test takers, the pass rate's about 65 to 68%. Second-time passing rate for second-time test takers drops significantly. And most of the first-time test takers are recent graduates. So this is one reason to take get your GIT and get the FG portion of the exam out of the way. Because when I took my licensing exam, at the time the experience requirement was 7 years, so I had 2 years for school, 5 years, and then I had to go back and study everything that I'd forgotten. I'd been working in groundwater for so long, it was like, oh gosh, now I have to know the building code and the seismic code and this code and that code. And I studied for 3 hours every night for 6 months. And I passed, but it was not fun. So, careers in licensing. I don't know when Adrian graduated, but this is Adrian Thiebel. The reason why there's a picture of Adrian, other than the fact that she graduated from CSU Chico, is Adrian was my primary field geologist on a project down in the Riverside area called the Stringfellow Hazardous Waste Site. Stringfellow was a former quarry in fractured rock that received 34 million gallons of liquid hazardous waste. And because the state permitted it, it's now your problem and my problem for the next 400 or 500 years. So it was a fractured bedrock aquifer. Adrian is a geologist who worked for a company called Geologic Associates, who had a contract with the State of California Department of Toxic Substances Control, for which I used to work. I used to spend $2 million a year, and about 900 to 1.3 million of it went to Geologic Associates, putting in wells and defining plumes. So Adrienne has a very, very nice job. She's a great mud logger, and she can design a mean monitoring well in a fractured bedrock terrain. So your degree from CSU TCO does make a difference. There are a lot of careers with the state of California. There's a lot of agencies with the state of California. If you're a geologist, you do have to be licensed in order to move up. The entry-level geology classifications are broken up into 4 ranges, A, B, C, and D. A's the lowest, D's the highest. The first 3 ranges are open to unlicensed folks. Anything range D, senior tech, supervisor, and above, you have to be licensed. So this is where licensing gets important. It gets you those promotions, it gets you those pay raises. These are just some of the agencies that you could work for. You know, the California Geological Society, Geological Survey, Caltrans, Department of Toxic Substances Control, Department of Water Resources, State Water Resources, California Parks, oil and gas, it goes on and on and on. A lot of people are intimidated by how to get a job with the state, and it's actually very easy. If somebody wants to do this live, we can, but we can go through the screenshots first. The state jobs website is better than the BPELS website, but that's not saying a whole lot. In order to get a state job, you have to pass an exam. It's a license. It's not a licensing exam. It's kind of a pre-qualification step. And you can get on an exam list in your senior year. You don't have to have your degree, so I would recommend that you do so. You go to this website and you go to the search exams and job vacancies. And I would be very general. I just put in geologist because there's a lot of different geologist classifications. There's engineering geologists, there's oil and gas geologists, you know, it goes on and on. So be creative in your searches. This is just a screenshot of what happens when I put in geologist last week. There are 3 exam bulletins and 7 vacancies under the staff engineering geologist classification. The exams are the pre-qualification step, and they're usually all online now. And then the job vacancies are the actual job listings. So what you do is you get online, you go through the online exam, and then it will generate a score. And the employers will pull from that list. They will either send you an invitation to apply for a job, or you can look online for the job listings and apply for a job by saying, I'm on the geologist list given by the Department of Toxics, or I'm on the geologist list for exam from the State Water Resources Control Board. And I looked this morning, and I think all of these jobs are still listed. So right now is a good time to be a geologist and work for the State Water Board because of the drought. There's all kinds of jobs out there right now. And in the coming years, there's a lot of, the state workforce is generally older. So there's going to be a lot of positions opening up if working for the state is something that interests you. Whether you decide to go into consulting or work for a private firm when you first graduate or go to the state is a matter of personal preference. When I was younger and dumb, I used to think that a career path was a straight line, and it is certainly not. It is more of a curlicue, going different directions. I honestly thought I was going to be a mining geologist. My backup plan was I was going to work for the National Park Service. And nobody had those kind of jobs available when I was graduating. What was out there was Yank-a-tank work, underground storage tank removals, because that law had gone into effect and people were just begging for help on that type of work. And All my career, I was saying, 5 more years, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing something else. I did get offered a job at Yosemite National Park, and the dumbest decision, I had to write up a request for bid to drill behind Folsom Dam. I had to put a drill rig on a boat, drill through the water column, and drill into bedrock. I had no idea how in the hell to do that. My friend Mohammed that I went to school with works for Caltrans. He sat on the back of a barge drilling in San Francisco Bay. I called him up, Mohammed, how in the hell am I supposed to do this? Come on down. Went down to Caltrans, he introduced me to their drillers, said, guys, take care of her. That's how I wrote up my request for bid. I went to the drillers from Caltrans who did that kind of work. The only reason I knew how to get there was because of the person sitting next to me in class. And that networking is still out there today. So, getting experience. You are lucky in that you go to school here at Chico. It sounds like your professors are very practice-oriented. First off, any job experience is good job experience. If you've worked at Baskin-Robbins, if you've worked at Bob's Big Boy, anything that proves that you get out there and you show up when you're supposed to show up and you do your job, that's good. If you can get a job or an internship or even a short-term volunteer position in your field, that's that much better. If you've done projects here at school, a senior thesis, you can write that up on your resume and use it to document that you do good work. Get creative. When I first got hired by the state, the economy hit the fan, and there were threats of layoffs. Both myself and my husband were the last hired, first fired category. So we were facing going from dual income, no kids, making money hand over fist, to being out of work. And our backup plan was that we were going to sell our house, buy a boat, and go to Hawaii. We were going to live on the boat, or we were going to be volunteers at the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And I know you probably can't see this, but Hawaiian Volcano Observatory provides free lodging for as many as 7 volunteers at a time. So if you can get a plane ticket and get approved to be a volunteer at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, there's a good chance you have a place to stay in Hawaii. So that would be great on a resume. So get creative. Go to the USA Jobs and type in volunteer. Type in student intern. Go to Google, Bing, Yahoo, whatever search engine is your preference. Get creative. The advantage that you have now is that you have the internet, and it's a lot easier to find those kind of things. So, starting the process. For both the exam, list exams, and job applications, follow directions. If they say a 1-page resume, 12-point type, give them a 1-page resume, 12-point type. Don't shrink it down to 9-point, because old people like me with bifocals are going to be reading these. And I will just put that one aside going, you didn't follow directions. Order your transcripts ahead of time. The best advice I ever got from my dad was when you graduate, order 10 sealed copies of your transcripts. But make sure when you order them that the registrar has already put your degree on there. Because it takes, I think, 2 to 3 months is what I'm seeing for them to actually show your degree on your transcripts. I used those 10 copies. My last 10th copy was submitted for the job I have now. So do that. It'll save you a lot of stress in the long run. You may think it's stupid that you're carrying around these things for 25 years. But man, when you need to put in a job application in a hurry at the last minute, you can pull that out of the drawer, throw it in an envelope, and you're done. Best advice my dad ever gave. Tailor your resume or application for the job. My husband has a quite varied career. It takes 7 resumes to describe everything he's done. He's been a farmer. He's been a geologist. He's been in the military. He's taught diving. He had to take this job and shove it moment and taught diving for 2 years. And then he went to work for the state as a geologist. So definitely tailor your resume or application to the job. There was a job I applied for at the regional board in Tahoe, which is not an easy place to get into just because of location. It was for a geologist doing erosion control in forest areas after fires. The closest thing I had was my landslide experience. They didn't want to hear about all the great work I've done at MPL sites cleaning up groundwater because it has nothing to do with the job. So I tailored my application specifically to describe the engineering geology work I've done. Consider writing a qualification statement, whether the job requires it or not. If it doesn't require it, don't submit it. But the reason for doing it, even though I will grant you it is a royal pain, is if you sit down for an hour or two and think about why am I qualified for this job, and you put it in writing, when you get that first question in the interview that goes, tell us why you're qualified for this job, you're ready for it. Another thing that will often happen is you will be asked to write something in your interview. There will be a writing test. It's not, they will say, and a very common thing is tell us why you are qualified for this job. At the state, I got that exact question. I had it all written already in my head because I'd written it 3 days before. It's a pain, but do it. Beware of social media pitfalls. If you have a Facebook page, get your privacy settings in line so that I can't Google you and find a picture of you wearing your underwear on your head. I really don't want to see that, but employers will Google you. They will access your Facebook page if it is not private. They will look at LinkedIn. They will look at anything and everything, any digital footprint that you have. They will try and find it. They can't, in California, I do not believe they can specifically ask you for access to your Facebook account. But if it's not private and they can get to it online, they're perfectly within their rights to look at it. So make sure you take care of your privacy settings. And get a real email address. I don't care if you want to say, hey, sexydude@gmail.com. Don't put that on your resume. Really, don't. Just don't do it. You'll be passed around the office and laughed at. Get a Yahoo account, johnsmith@yahoo.com, and have all your emails forwarded to your sexy ladies man email address. But don't put that on your resume. And then interview tips. Dress for the job you want. Don't spend $500 on a suit, especially for a state job. Really don't. You'll be overdressed. But do go in there looking presentable. Business casual, a nice dress shirt, maybe a tie, some nice slacks is fine. I have actually worn this to a job interview. Be presentable. Don't come in your shorts and your t-shirt. I've had people do that. Be early or on time. And remember what you learned in kindergarten. Be nice to everybody. When I was in consulting and I was a regional manager for environmental for the company I was working for, I had an applicant unload on the receptionist because I was on a phone call and he was going to have to wait 10 minutes for me to interview him. And he was all nice and sweet to me, and I went out and I talked to the receptionist after he left, and she told me that he was a real a-hole to her. He did not get the job. He did not get a call back. Assume that everybody you talk to is part of your interview process. They're the people you're going to be working with. And you are not any more important to the team than the secretary. So remember that. Be nice to everybody. And when you get to the interview, remember they called you. You wouldn't be in that interview if they weren't interested in you. So relax. Be yourself. They're going to see through the bullshit anyway. But have some confidence that the reason you got there was because your resume was good enough. When I the last time I hired a geologist for the state, we got 35 applications. We interviewed 10 people. And there were people in those, of those 35 applicants, there were people that I had used to work with that we had to rule out. I had one guy submit an application with a pen, in pen. He was a guy I worked with. He'd always worked in the field. He had never done any office work. But one thing you will find is that there's not an exclusively field job out there anymore. When I was in consulting, I would tell my employees, if the client doesn't know why you are important to him, he is not going to pay you. If I can't explain to the client what I did for them, they are not going to pay you. If your boss doesn't understand what you did for them, he's not going to promote you. The key to most things in life is communication. Written communication, verbal communication. You don't have to be the most eloquent person in the world. I certainly am not. But I can sit down with a client and tell them, this is why I want you to spend $50,000 on one well. This is why I expect you to pay me on time. I can go into my boss and make a case for a particular mode of action. And if you can't do that, you're not going to get very far. Definitely research the company, the agency, the job, whatever. I helped a friend of mine interview for a mechanic's job at CHP. He failed miserably the first time because the first question out of the interviewer's mouth was, what is the mission of the CHP? He hadn't even bothered to look. And say thank you. Email is totally acceptable. It's almost preferred anymore. So definitely do that. And if you can, make sure you get something off the website for the company or the agency that you work for. One reason why I got the job I'm in now is I managed to find an org chart for the board, and I managed to figure out where I fit in the organization or where I was going to fit. And using that, I was able to ask some reasonably intelligent questions in the interview. It took me about 45 minutes to find it. It's not something that takes a long time, but it will make a difference. The other thing is, if you don't know the answer to something, don't bullshit. If you go and if you try and bullshit your way through a question, they'll know. These people are generally licensed. They've been around for a while. Try and rehearse your answers ahead of time. For example, if somebody asked me, Lori, how does a ground penetrating radar work? I'm not sure I can answer that. That's your answer. You just say, I'm not sure. However, when I come to work for you, I'm sure as hell gonna learn, and I'm really interested in finding out, you know. It sounds trite, it sounds kind of cheesy, but find a way to answer the question. Get on Google. Google the top 20 hardest interview questions that you can find. I can guarantee you there's gonna be a question that will say, what is your biggest fault? Nobody likes that one.
San Andreas.
Yeah. You know, and that's a good answer, because if you're funny, if you're comfortable enough in the interview to make a joke, they will like you. You know, another question that I hate is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Believe it or not, people still ask that question. I got it 6 months ago in an interview at the water board. It was awful. I told the guy that I expected to be on the beach in Bahamas because I was going to win the lottery and quit. And I got the job. So, and then I quit 6 months later for this one. But he knew that going in, that I was looking for a senior job. And anyway, so think about your answers. Be prepared. Be prepared to sell yourself, because that's what you're doing. And if you can do that in an interview, when you get to the job, you can do that while you're on the job. Because from day one, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go into your boss and say, this is what I did for you today. This is why you should promote me. This is why I should be doing this project over here, because it's really cool and I earned it. So those are the types of things that you should be thinking about. So any questions before we hit the internet and look at some of the sites live? Can you spend the
relationship between the GAT exam and fundamentals exam? I'm not clear on how those two.
The fundamentals of geology, the ASBOG Fundamentals of Geology test is the exam. The GIT is a certificate you are awarded that documents that you successfully passed that test
Okay.
and that you are on your way to licensure.
And then beyond that, in order to get registered, you need to do what?
You need to do the experience under a licensed professional, and then you need to pass the Professional Geologist exam and the California specific exam. The California specific exam, the topics are actually codified in the law. You have to know California geology, you have to know California regulations. So if you have a chance to take your California geology elective class, I would suggest that you do so, because the pass rate for the CSE exam is in the 20s.
Can you take that specific soon after you graduate college, or do you have to
No,
wait?
that's one that you have to wait. That's the one that the PG and the CSE are the actual, you have to take at the time of licensing. But there's a lot of people who don't even know the various geomorphic provinces of California. There are people who don't know what the California State Rock is. What's the California State Rock? What's the California State Gem? Benitoite.
Later.
Oh, jam.
What's the California State Fossil? Smilodon. You
What's
know?
the species name?
Smilodon californicus?
Oh, Florida. Got reverted to Florida.
Okay. So, I mean, I can guarantee you that those 3 or 4 questions will be on the exam. So, yeah, anyway.
But just to follow up on Rachel's comment though, however, when you graduate, you should consider taking the FG, the fundamentals of geology, quickly while it's still fresh in your.
Well, it's still fresh in your mind. The pass rate goes from 65% to 39%. So if you can get that one out of the way, you're ahead of the game. You've got your GIT certificate, which you have forever. You don't have to pay renewal fees on it, and you can use it on your resume.
And the FG has no time limit either.
No. Yes, sir.
I'm a foreigner, so I'm German, so I'm now in this country and I want to apply for a state job.
Mm-hmm.
I do not have them because it's in Germany it didn't exist, transcripts. What do I do?
So if
So
you
I'm
want,
already disqualified?
no, you are not disqualified.
Thank you.
Foreign degrees are accepted all the time. We get a lot of questions of people who want to have their degree evaluated by one of these companies that advertises they evaluate degrees. Don't waste your money. We do not, at least for the licensing board, we do not accept those. What we will ask for is an English translation, a certified English translation of your transcript. And we will, whenever I get an application for licensure or a job application, I actually look at the transcript. Did you take basic geology? Did you take structure? Did you take this class? Did you take that class? Depending on what the position is for. I know of at least 2 or 3 geologists with foreign degrees who are taking the exam in October. One was a gentleman from Spain who has probably more experience than I will ever have and is probably 10 times smarter than I ever will be. But he provided a certified copy of his transcripts. His references were all from Spain. A non-licensed reference is acceptable if they are working in an area where they are not required to be licensed. So, for example, if your reference works for USGS, all they have to do is provide me a resume so I can see that they are responsible and qualified to provide a reference. The 3 references I got for the gentleman in Spain were wonderful. I mean, these people were working on just these big, huge international projects, and it was totally exciting to see this resume. So you are not out of luck.
So how do you get a certified copy, an English translation of your?
There are companies that will do certified
Okay, so,
English
yes,
translations. I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
So what's the job site?
Go to Google first, and then type in BPOS. OS space there it is. Vacancy search. Receipt return. Okay, that's the California.
Incidentally, our department website has almost all of these linked.
Go to
And if we
home.
find one that's not, let us know and we'll add it.
Okay, so under job title, type in student.